Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 96 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. Joe Meade is with me tonight. And Joe, it's been a while, a lot of roster changes. So let's just go through a couple of the rosters, what we think they're doing. Obviously, it's still just April 28th when we are recording, still some roster spots to be filled. But Joe, um, we're just going to go through the Torvik roster rankings. He has updated it, I would say pretty much up to now. If there's not an updated player, it'll be there shortly. But Joe, a lot of new players in the Big Ten. So where do you want to start?
Sean, I think it's probably best to start with probably some of the more prominent recruiting classes, and that could be any way you sort it, like depending on whether you're a West Coast Big Ten fan, like from the old Pac-12 or traditional Big Ten. But I think the only fair way to do this is probably just based on Torvik. So let's start at who's number one in the conference, number two allegedly in the country, and that's the Purdue Boilermakers. Sean, I think the addition of Oscar Clough was what caught most people's eyes, and I don't think most people within Big Ten country had much of a doubt that Braden and Trey Coppin-Red, especially Fletcher Lawyer too, CJ Cox would stay. Um, in college, there is always the extra doubt that one of those guys gets a big bag somewhere else, like Kentucky, or maybe Texas Tech, who's been a dark horse spender in this cycle, and to transfer there. But the fact they kept most of their core four, I mean, all of their core four, to be honest with you. And then you're adding Oscar Clough to that. I think probably the only thing that sticks out of this roster as a bad thing is perhaps depth. But even then, if one of these freshmen, like a Jack Benter, Aaron Fine, or some of these other guys out of nowhere performs well, then maybe Purdue really has something. But what are your thoughts, Sean?
And Oscar Meyer, I think his name is, the European kid. He's not on here. Was highly sought after from a number of teams. He is a professional. We're seeing a lot more of that these days, especially over at Illinois and some other places. Um, but I'm not sure. I don't know if there's really a formula for that yet. Um, so Meyer is in there too. He's probably going to be the starting three if I had to guess, and then you have Cox, Harris, Jacobson off the bench, and you're getting to eight there. So if you could just get something else from any of the other names on here, they're in good shape. This sort of roster retention is not something that we see very often anymore, Joe, and I think that they're um, probably going to be the preseason number one ranked team right now. I actually did not see who was first on Torvik before I.
Probably Houston, right?
Houston will be high. Let's take a look at the national. Yeah, so it's Houston, Purdue,
Yeah.
BYU. Yeah, I mean that's Houston and BYU. Houston's got some retention. BYU's got the biggest bank account in the business. So Purdue's in good shape. They should start the season up there, and they get their key players back. They replace Colvin and Heidi with, um, some better role players, honestly, for them, and they should be looking pretty good. All right, Joe, up second is your Michigan Wolverines, fifth in the country in Torvik, eighth overall in both offense and defense. And let's go into their roster page. Obviously, a huge question mark here around Yaxel Lendenborg. He's still in the NBA draft. He has committed to Michigan still. Um, Not known yet if he will play for the Wolverines or just go to the pros. To get Mara from UCLA, Cadeau from North Carolina, Merez Johnson from Illinois, Trey McKinney, a highly sought after recruit. You get a couple of returners in Roddy Gale and LJ Kaysen. And Joe, again, Michigan did their work early in the transfer portal. There hasn't been much on the roster front in a while, other than Gale announcing that he's back. But Michigan did their work early, and they're looking to be pretty good next year.
Yeah, and one thing I think Torvik hasn't caught up to, at least on this edition, is the fact that Namari Burnett is back. So one of the biggest concerns without him would have been shooting. But Namari's about a 40% 3-point shooter. I think with Elliot Cadeau, obviously you might have the higher turnover rate, but to be honest with you, that's nothing new for Michigan. And the fact that uh the fact that you add Namari back into that, you have
And
Elliot
you
Cadeau,
can do it on
who's
this tool. So let's see what it
yeah,
comes up with. All right, so you actually are going down 2 spots in Torvik with Damari
Oh,
back
that
in
makes
there.
I disagree with Torvik there. But either way, Sean, I really believe that with Nabari back, this offense flows a lot better, especially if Yaxel ends up coming in. Even without him, Sean, there's enough minutes to be had in the front and back court for guys to make up like an Adai Mara, Merez Johnson. I think you kind of got the tough, gritty guy who gets rebounds and Merez Johnson Jr. And then should Merez get dominated by a Clough or a Trey Kaufman Wren or someone because of height, then you could throw a Mara in there, who's also, I think a lot of people didn't realize he was dealing with the illness for most of the year at UCLA. This was a guy who was a borderline 5-star prospect coming into 2023. So perhaps a change of system, a change of scenery, and maybe a 15 to 20-minute role at first. He could be a lot more effective. And then I think the dark horse here is if Trey McKinney um, is the 5-star we all believe he is. He poured 21 in the USA versus Team World game. If he could be effective, Sean, I think this team could be really scary. And that's whether with Yaxel or without. But I think as of now, Yaxel's probably 50-50. I think it's this period point blank that if he comes, Michigan is a top five team. If he doesn't come, probably a top 10 to 15. And then what's funny, Sean, is their sixth man last year was Will Shetter. He's probably the eighth option on this team with or without Lendenberg. He's not on this list right now, but
I can add him in there too.
yeah.
Yep. Let's see if so the minutes breakdown is what I don't think Kaysen's going to get 27% of the minutes here,
Mm-mm.
but let's see here. We added in Will Cheddar and it's loading. But Joe, one of the other thing outside of this here is all right, you're back up to sixth. There you
Mhm.
go. Better offense, a little worse defense. They must really not like Namari's defense.
Yeah.
Uh, um, but the question is for me, there's still a couple pretty big fish here in the transfer portal. Do you think Michigan could pivot to one of those players, like an RJ Lewis or Jameer Watkins, if Lendenborg does stay in the draft?
I think they pivot directly toward Jameer Watkins. I believe there was some mutual interest last year for whatever reason, probably being Michigan admissions that fizzled out. But Jameer Watkins being a grad transfer now without Lendenberg at the four, or Jameer Watkins more of a three, but perhaps could fit it at the four as well, given Michigan's versatility. This is a lot more of a diverse lineup in terms of skill set than last year's team. So I think if you factor that in, then probably not accounting for the production that Lendenberg will, but Shabir Watkins averaged 19 points 2 years in a row at Florida State. I doubt he would struggle way too much in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think he's probably as good as you can get if it comes to a replacement. Last year, we thought that Michigan was probably a starting player short. I think ultimately that's kind of why they did struggle when they did. Danny Wolf had to sort of be the point guard, and it worked most of the time. But when it didn't, potentially that like three scoring wing. Lennon is a little bigger than that, but Watkins is certainly that scoring wing that could be what Michigan is missing. All right, Joe, a little bit surprised to see this team up here in third. UCLA comes into the top 10 and Torvik at seventh. And the crown jewel, the transfer portal so far has been Donovan Dent. Went into the transfer portal, the former New Mexico player, with a price tag. Mick Cronin and UCLA were awfully happy to meet that price tag, over $3 million. You get a couple of other returners, Bilodeau, Clark, Daly. You get Xavier Booker, the Michigan State transfer. Um, those five are pretty good. Don't know much about the rest of their role players. Jamar Brown's a senior. Then you've got some younger players, Trent Perry in there, but starting lineup's pretty good for UCLA. Could come down to what their depth can do.
Yeah, Sean, I think it's kind of the story we talked about with Purdue this year. I think UCLA could have the kind of team that gets out to a 6-1 or a 7-1 start in conference play, but that tail end, Purdue really struggled, especially going into February and into the Big Ten tournament. We saw them have some not so great performances, not certainly up to Purdue standards. And I think this UCLA team, that's the only downside I could have for it. I think with Bilodeau, Donovan Dent, and Eric Daly, and perhaps if Sky Clark continues to ascend, that's a really good big three right there. I think Bilodeau's really improved throughout this year. I really am high on Eric Daly. I've always been high on him, whether it was Oklahoma State or at UCLA. And he's shown in spurts this year that he's really effective getting to the rim and generating offense. And then I think adding Donovan Dent, I don't see how this team gets worse, Sean. I think it's almost physically impossible. And I do think the one thing that will restrict them, as lame as an excuse as it sounds, might be the travel, might be just that ridiculous distance they travel. Because on paper, clearly Torvik agrees there's only two teams better than them. And frankly, Sean, if Donovan Dent really fixes all their issues, I can't see why they couldn't be an early dark horse to win the Big Ten regular season title.
And I brought up Jamar Brown's page here. He's a transfer from UMKC. It says junior and senior here, so you'd think maybe JUCO or NAIA for his first 2 years. Incredibly good from the free throw line, 91 and 86%, 40 and 31%. He did improve 9 points while shooting the same amount of threes. So potentially UCLA has got themselves a scorer off the bench. Um, and then, Trent Perry, he's somebody 53% of the minutes. Not sure that they really want that, but still, he was a good free throw shooter, good offensive rating numbers. He if he has to be the seventh or eighth guy, maybe there's a role there for him. And this UCLA team is starting to come together. Not sure they have much left in the bank. That's kind of why they went big for Dent early. They got him. Xavier Booker reportedly had a price tag in the millions. Um, Joe, is this a finished product in your opinion, or do you think they need one or two more guys?
I think they definitely need one or two more in terms of contending, whether it's for the national title or certainly within the Big Ten. I think depth's caught up to teams in this conference, certainly caught up to Michigan when they dealt with some minor injuries in the title race. And that's why, frankly, Sean, Michigan State ran away with this title this year. They had the most depth. Um, I mean, maybe you could say some injury luck, but even then, Sean, um, one guy on that team, unless it was Richardson or Akins, I don't think would have made the difference.
So, Joe, we could play this game over the summer as these roster comes together, but what do you think UCLA's starting lineup is? I don't know if you could go Booker, Daly, and Bilodeau.
No, I think Booker's got to come off the bench. I think Dent, Bilodeau, Clark, Daly, and then that's your main issue there, Sean. I don't
Yeah.
know who fills in that fifth spot. I think
It,
Booker might play starter minutes, but
it could be Brown, but as the veteran, you probably sold him on the bench role. You probably want him in the bench role, and it's a difficult one. Maybe that fifth player's not on their team yet, but that is a game that we can look at. UCLA, though, is looking good for year two for them in the Big Ten. Mick Cronin, you know, had a good team this year, but certainly there were some things that they could do better. Let's keep going down the list. Joe, 11th, Illinois. A lot of these teams are highly ranked, by the way. You get into the double digits in the Big Ten, you're still in the top 40. But Bratislav Underwood, the new nickname for the Illinois coach, after his he's really recruiting Europe pretty hard. We saw it last year with Tomislav Visic, Kasparis Yakashonis, Big Z. Tomislav's brother comes over from Illinois. They get Andrei Stojakovic just a couple hours ago. That's Paige's son. And then, there's reportedly some others on the way too. You get Boswell back, Ty Rogers back, Jake Davis back off the bench. Joe, it's again more roster turnover for the Illini, but again, still talent there.
yeah, Sean, I think a lot of people were somewhat critical of Underwood losing some of these guys in the portal and then not being as active in the portal. But I think people forget this is kind of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe in that portal scene. There's not just one portal. There's the European portal. That's a whole nother continent of players that are really, really good. And
And these are recruits technically, but these are professional basketball
oh yeah,
players, Joe. So it is, they would not be here if it wasn't for NIL. And I know there's some rules around certain countries on whether they can get NIL or not, but these are professionals. Ivisic is going to be a junior next year. If you play enough pro ball, they're going to dock you a year. So Ivisic, this last year was his first year. That was technically his sophomore year, but they're getting pros. Stojakovic, obviously not a pro from Europe. He came over from Stanford where he was the guy, but a lot of talent in Champaign again.
a lot of scoring talent too, Sean. I think this team could be a lot like this year's teams in terms of talent. Whether it's in terms of execution, I don't know. Frankly, if I'm an Illini fan, I don't want that execution because we saw the up and down. And frankly, that's all it was all year. We'd get high on them after a great performance, we get low on them. And then with the caveat that, oh, there's too much talent. This is not going to last. And it didn't. But then it just went back to the status quo. So I think that's something that Brad Underwood's probably going to have to examine. I think this is an older team than last year, especially without Riley Yakashotis um, being the main facilitators. So um, does uh does Brad Underwood take another step forward? I think last year was a minor step back. I don't think that's a big deal on a program level. This year, can he get them playing more consistent, and can he get them off the 30-point swing where you win by 30 and then lose by 15? And that just made no sense the whole year.
And I think there's another player that's signed here, Joe, that's not in this. Yeah, Mihailo Petrovic from
Yes.
Serbia. He's also on there. He's again a school player who scored double digits in the European Pro League or in a European professional league, which is, we've seen people do that before and then be really good in college. So, um, I don't think Petrovic is on here. I don't think we can add him to this equation, but still, if they're 11th without him, you'd have to think that they would get into the top 10 with him. So, um, Rogers, Boswell back. Other than that, you've got a lot of Europeans who will no doubt score the ball. Will the range of outcomes be as wide? Hopefully not. But maybe this team could be, if they're just a little more consistent, they're probably going to be better than last year. So interesting season for Illinois here. Brad is really the only one who's 100% sort of bought into this European pro model of getting players. We've seen it a couple places elsewhere, but these guys are coming in and they're hoping to win some games. All right, Michigan State up next, Joe, at 13th. The Big Ten regular season champions return. A decent number of players: Jeremy Fears, Cohen Carr, Jackson Kohler, Carson Cooper. They do lose Jace Richardson to the draft. I think Akins is also
Out of
coming back.
eligibility.
Oh, he's
No,
out.
he's out of
Okay.
eligibility.
So they bring in Caleb Glenn from FAU, good transfer, solid player there, about 12 points. And then they bring in Trey Fort from, I believe,
Stanford.
Sanford. Yep. He played Mississippi State before, but this is a little, we haven't seen Isso use the portal before, but he's definitely bringing in two players that should um, elevate what those players there have already done.
Yeah, shot it. There's this a rumor about Darius Adams, former 5-star, who was committed to UConn for the longest time, decommitting. Michigan State was really high on him prior to his commitment to UConn. Does he fit into the equation too? That's the only other.
We can look.
Uh,
We can put him in there.
yeah, that's the only other one I could think of to be
Oh,
added.
maybe not.
There are some RJ Lewis rumors. I don't want to even say it's close to likely because, with the NBA draft combine pretty soon, and then I think anyone else at this point would have to be pretty out of the blue, to be honest with you, Sean.
And you could see somebody like Kurt Tang maybe take a step into a role. He didn't really do much last year. I mean, you've got Cooper and Kohler. And Joe, if they're both going to start, you potentially want another big. There is not a lot of height on this team. Glenn is a three. Maybe he could play small ball four, but you would have to think that Cooper and Kohler are both going to start. Kohler did his best work at the four last year. Um, so maybe another big is in the pipeline here, or they have gotten one, and this isn't updated yet. But Izzo has not used the portal much in the past, but when he has, really, Tyson Walker and Joey Hauser have been great, and Fiddler was okay, but Izzo doesn't use it much, but he usually hits when he brings people in.
Yeah, that's why I think, Caleb Glenn, people are underplaying the 12. Certainly not you, but
Yeah,
other
they have
people
a
are
lot of
saying,
good players on that team.
yeah. And the American, look at a lot of these guys from the American that are transferring into programs have been doing pretty well. And another thing too, Sean, the most direct example, sorry, being those FAU guys. Perhaps this is an extreme example between Martin, Janelle Davis, and Vlad Golden. But another thing too, Sean, you look at this year, uh, the top 50, whether you look at Odd Three or the other sites, they're littered with American players, American Athletic Conference players. So I think Tom Izzo might be onto something here. I certainly think he's earned the right over the last 30 years for me to not doubt his talent evaluation. Now, how this roster fits going into the year, I think there's probably going to be some rough spots per usual, but I think by January, Michigan State's probably going to be in the thick of the Big Ten title race, or at least playing for that double bye we talk about.
Yeah, and Caleb Glenn only 64% of the minutes last year at FAU. So even if he is a starter at Michigan State, like there shouldn't be much. It's not like he played 90% of the minutes and took 20 shots a game to get 12 points. He really didn't. He was 40% from three, 60% from two, had a really good effective field goal percentage. Good in the top games too, and everybody can see this, so I won't read it off. But I think he is the sort of player. He started at Louisville as a high recruit that he gets in the system for Michigan State. He's probably going to be one of their better players, by the end of the year.
Absolutely, Sean. And one last thing, if Jeremy Fears Jr. could improve his shooting as well, I think that adds a different element to this team. But that's all I have right now, the Spartans.
And Carr too. I mean, we saw some glimpses of a Big Ten starting quality player at the end of the year. He had some really good games. If he can become that, at least a threat from out there, that will open things up for him and the rest of the team.
1,000%, Sean. And one last thing on Carr. Even if he doesn't, the athleticism and rim protecting and ability to cut to the basket, I think I think to be honest, is lethal enough where he might not have to improve his shooting.
Yep. All right, up next, Joe, is USC. A rather big splash today. Still have to make the post for this guy. But Eric Musselman loses a big player in Desmond Claude just a couple days ago. Not exactly sure where he's going. They spent big for Maryland transfer Rodney Rice. They land him. They spend big for Auburn transfer Chad Baker Mazzara. Two huge transfers at the top of the line for Muss.
Yeah, Sean, and this is kind of the theme of musts we've seen. This, obviously we saw it in Arkansas, somewhat at Nevada, but mainly it's been at his last two stops. Do I love these additions on their own? Certainly, but do I think it all fits together? Probably not quite yet. I think it could have the potential to be this year's team where they have these games they play really well, particularly at Illinois versus Michigan State, and then they have games where they just get walked off the floor. So I think the biggest thing you look at this roster, they probably need more height. Also, shot at another key loss is outside of Desmond Claude, they do lose Wesley Yates as well, who committed to Washington, we will probably talk about. So I think he made up for the scoring. Now, in terms of height, I think they need a big man for me to feel somewhat okay about this roster being where it is on Bart Torvik.
And they bring Ezra Ausar in from Eastern Carolina, um, and Utah, sorry, Eastern Carolina before. Another one of those American transfers, Joe. He is probably like a 4.5 in the Big Ten. I don't really know if he can be qualified as a center. And then Jacob Kofi, they get from Virginia. Obviously, Tony Bennett left there before the season. In his freshman year, he was pretty solid there. I think he probably does play the five. Not quite a threat from downtown, but he did make 10 threes. It seems like the bones of this team are there. And Elijah Arenas, the highly sought after freshman son of Gilbert that they brought in, he was in a car crash and he ended up going to the hospital. It looks like he'll be okay. Not sure if this affects his availability for next year, but you're starting to see the team, Joe. The one thing is there's not many returning players. In fact, there might not be any once we go down this list. So Musselman's got new players in there. He's got two players at the top of the line who could probably go head to head with any two really in the country if they can work together and play as a team. And this is just a total question mark with me. None of these players have played together. I think we could see a wide range of USC Trojan teams this year.
Yeah, Sean, it's one of those teams where if the record's anywhere from 10 to 20 wins, nothing will shock me.
And Keontae Jones, Joe, this transfer from CSN, I think that's Cal Northridge in the Big
Yeah.
West. He's 6'6". They have him as a power forward and center here. I don't know about that. He's 34% from three on low volume. So I'm not really sure if you can start him at the three. He is a great rebounder and assist guy, though, as you can see these rates right here. But he looks like a small ball forward just from his profile on Torvik that we're looking at here. So and maybe they might have a few dollars left in the bank, Joe. They might be able to pick up somebody else here. There's still a couple hundred players in the transfer portal uncommitted, but you're starting to see what he's trying to build here. This is going to be one of those Musselman teams that's just really tall and long and athletic, and maybe they just can be good enough defensively and have their stars win them games down the stretch. But this one will be real interesting to watch early on because it really like could be anything.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep rolling down the list. Ohio State at 21st. Torvik's got them as a top offense, six and offense, 42nd in defense. They actually return a ton of players, Joe. They bring back Thornton, Royal, and Mobley, and a couple of bench players, Chapman. And then really the only add that they've made is Gabe Cupps, the Indiana backup point guard who was limited with a shoulder injury last year. Diebler gets the core of his guys back again. And without adding much, what what do you see here for the Buckeyes?
Well, the first thing I'd also say, Sean, Brandon Noel, the Wright State transfer, average
Yeah.
19 a game. How he fits in, I don't quite know, but I don't think it really matters. I think the main story is your big three are back: Thornton, Royal, John Mobley Jr. I'm not even going to touch on the Michi Johnson thing because he was effectively not there the entire year to me. So we could get off that topic real quick. This is a team. It kind of feels like they're going to bank on the improvement of their guys, whether it's John Mobley Jr. taking that year two jump. We saw plenty of games last year where he just lit it up from three. I thought he was a little too liberal with some of his shot selection, but I think probably Diebler allowed him to do that, whether that was through the recruiting pitch or just in practice, because I don't doubt he's not making most of those in practice. Bruce Thornton, I think, is the key to this team, like he was this year. I think that big three offensively is probably the best in the conference. I know everyone could argue about me with the Purdue big three or the UCLA big three, but I think the fact this duo's back for year two, all three together, Devin Royals really improved. I think between all that, Sean, it's going to come down to their big play if they really take this step up. I think this team should make the tournament. Anything short of that's a complete failure for Jake Diebler.
Yeah, I think the starting lineup, or at least the top four, I think Tilly will probably start at the five. And, other than that, you've got Royal probably at the four. So maybe you want a wing or a three. Is that Noel? I don't know. Chapman also. Bynum is a highly ranked freshman. I think there are certainly roles for these guys, but we're just going to have to, the way roster building is right now, positions aren't as important as long as you have a point guard and a center. And, teams just kind of fill the two, three, and four with whoever. So I think at least one of those positions could be up for grabs. I think Cups is probably just the backup point guard. And I don't know if that'll do much with Bruce Thornton playing, 35 minutes in meaningful games. So, um, it is this sort of a little bit of running it back too much for you, being that last year's team was kind of not that good.
Um, I mean, perhaps I think that's kind of more of a good thing, to be honest with you, Sean, just because you have that continuity. I don't doubt these guys will improve just playing together another year. I think it highly depends on these transfers they got, particularly Noel, and whether they improve. They lose Bradshaw and Stewart. I don't think Ohio State fans or anyone who followed that program was that upset about it. So, can there be improvement there, or could that be standard enough where the improvement of Mobley Jr. and Thornton and Royal is enough? I think that's the main question going into 2025 for the Buckeye basketball program.
And Noel here, as I'm just looking at it while you're talking here, Joe. He's a power forward slash center as a freshman, then a stretch four, then a wing. So obviously, I have not watched enough Horizon League basketball to understand what's going on here, but 36% on 100 attempts from three. Maybe he can play the three for them, or at least maybe a hybrid 3-4 with Devin Royal. But Diebler will have to figure that out. Figuring out a starting lineup is probably the toughest thing that we're doing right now. Joe, they've got four good players, three that could be good. How is that going to work out into a rotation? And we might not even know at the end of non-conference play. But let's keep it rolling here, Joe, because we do have a lot of teams. Wisconsin at 25th. A couple of interesting things going on here. Blackwell is back. Tanji is gone. He's out of eligibility. Crowell gone, out of eligibility. Klesmet gone, out of eligibility. They do bring back Nolan Winter and a couple of their role players like Jack Janicki and Andrew Rode. But Nick Boyd is the big one that they pick up. He was on the FAU Final Four team. He goes to San Diego State this year, where he was sort of their lead guard, and they were good during the regular season until they got absolutely annihilated by North Carolina in the first four. But Nick Boyd seems to be that lead guard to get Blackwell off the ball. Maybe you get a little bit of a jump from one of these role players. And what's your thoughts on Wisconsin here?
I'm not in love with the roster. I think the latest draft grade Blackwell got I would have to assume he's back, Sean, to be
Yeah,
quite
yeah,
honest with you.
yeah.
Um, Barring something like that, I think this is probably a middle of the road Big Ten team that is going to be. Sean, did I lose you?
Yeah, you're back. You're back.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's going to be a team that's going to be a pain in the butt to play at worst. If, a Janicki or Winter doesn't severely improve. I think the fact you have Blackwell and Boyd, you could get enough scoring and playmaking from those guys, where if they could get a third real contributor playmaker, then you have something going, and perhaps they could float where they were this year around top five, top six of the conference. Right now, though, Sean, to be honest with you, I like Greg Gard. I like that they trust a lot of these role players to improve. I'm not in love with the star capability right now. That doesn't mean I can't change my opinion later. Just as of now, there's nothing on this roster that stands out to me other than middle of the road Big Ten team, which is still probably good enough to make the tournament, as we saw this year, Sean.
And Andrew Rohde is a transfer from Virginia, played 2 years there, 1 year at St. Thomas. He's listed at 6'6" here as a pure point guard, really high assist rate. So maybe he's the creator and you get Boyd and Blackwell off the ball. It's definitely better for Blackwell that he is off the ball. I'm not sure about Boyd. He was kind of off the ball at FAU in the American, and that worked. And then he was kind of the point guard at San Diego State this year. So interesting to see how the pieces fit for Wisconsin, like every team. All right, as we roll along here, we've got the Iowa Hawkeyes at 29. Ben McCullum comes into town, and we look at this one, Joe, 95 on defense, 115 on offense. That's something that I think we'll see a little bit of lower for both of them. I think the defense is supposed to be really good. Offense, they have a lot of individuals here. He brings over Bennett Sturts, his great player from Drake. He gets a couple of shooters. Brendan Hawson from Kansas State, former Villanova player. What are you expecting here from Iowa in year one?
I think it could go a lot of different ways, but I'm just going to pose the two most possible. I think it could go the way Mike Rhodes' first 2 years at Penn State had gone. Enough good players on the team to be competitive, but in unison, not much to Scott. I mean, not much to really fret about. If you're a Big Ten contender and throughout an entire 30 to 35 game season, uh, or it could go the way. I don't think it's going to go the way of Michigan this year, to be completely honest, Sean. It could also go the way of, you know, Jake Diebler's first year. I know a lot of those Ohio State guys came back, but a lot of these guys are familiar with McCollum and can perhaps put a contending team to get into the tournament. I don't see Iowa doing much better than that, though, Sean. I think there's a very small window, I guess small amounts of possibility with this team. It's not like USC where I go 10 to 22 wins. I think this could go anywhere like 14 to 18 to 19 wins.
I was going through some of the player pages as you were talking there, Joe. A couple transfers over from Drake. Fulgeras, this guy from Robert Morris, very highly sought after. It was kind of impressive that Iowa was able to get him. I think Providence, Villanova were involved. He's a sharpshooter, 41%. Um, the way I see this going is sort of they might shock some teams early on, whether it's non-conference or beginning of the Big Ten. They get enough big wins to like totally get in the conversation, and then teams might maybe start to figure it out them out later, maybe an injury, and they don't have a lot of depth. I think like West Virginia last year is how I would compare the good outcome for this Iowa team. Um, and there's still some scholarships to fill for the Hawkeyes, but it is going to be a culture shock for Iowa to go from insanely efficient offense and turnstile defense to the slowest pace in the country. And possession by possession, the offense isn't bad in McCollum's system as it's never has been. But the tempo and the pace is going to be, you know, as much of a 180 as you can possibly get. So let's keep going down the list here, Joe. My Indiana Hoosiers here at 33. Darren DeVries is starting to put together a roster here in year one. Tucker is the player who's always coming over. He gets Reed Bailey from Davidson, Lamar Wilkerson from Sam Houston over the likes of Auburn and Kentucky. Enright from DePaul played for him at Drake. You get Connor Way from Troy in the Sun Belt. You get Nick Dorn from Elon. Josiah Miles from North Florida. Another player from North Florida who's not on here, who's visiting today. Very likely he commits soon. Jason Drake from Drexel. Sam Alexis from Florida. Joe, we start to see how this roster for Indiana is shaping up, and it might be one or two pieces away from being complete.
Yeah, Sean. And it looks like Bryson Tucker's probably definitively gone. Is that
Hey,
correct?
Washington.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So with all that said, Sean, I'm gonna give you most of the floor here. My overwhelming comment is gonna be, um, can Tucker DeVries be the number one? Is he going to be the number one or two? That'd be
I
my
think
question.
Wilkerson will be the number one.
Wilkerson will be the number one scoring option.
Yeah. Tucker
Okay.
will be the two, and then other than that, I don't. I think those are the two definite starters. Other position is up for grabs.
Yeah. I'm gonna give you the floor after this, Sean. This is a as much as I want to say this could be a wide range of possibilities. I think it's more like Iowa just boosted up in wins, to be honest with you, just because you have Tucker and Wilkerson, who are more proven commodities than, as well as Darian at a high major level, more so than McCollum, and that might be unfair to him. It's just more of a sample size I'm comfortable with. I think Indiana goes anywhere like 17 to 20, 23 wins with this team, Sean.
Yeah, the way that this team is being constructed is sort of like a bunch of two through fours. Sam Alexis is probably the only true five that they've gotten so far. He was a great player at Chattanooga. Um, his freshman and sophomore years, he had, almost a double-double, really efficient, tons of rebounds. He goes to Florida, he doesn't play as many minutes. He gets injured and he doesn't really play a part in their national championship, but you know, he's listed at 6'8", 6'9". He's well into the 200s. He's a big guy. I don't think that if he has to be the backup five, I think that'll be okay. Reed Bailey is probably the biggest question mark for me. You got Connerway and Enright who will run the point. You have Wilkerson who'll be at the two, Tucker who will be at the four. Now, who starts at the three? Dorn, Miles, Sisley, all possible. Um, don't uh, don't really know much about them. They've all been very good at their various stops at different levels. I do think there is another five coming in. There's a couple of options on who that'll be, but there's some definites and there's some question marks. And really, the biggest one for me, Joe, is that there's very little high major experience here. Alexis played 17% of the minutes in Florida. Tucker played 7 games at West Virginia. Other than that, Connor Enright, 3/4 of a season at DePaul. That is all the high major action that you have here. So they all were all conference level players at their league, but what can they do in the Big Ten? We've seen conference player of the year from lower leagues come into the Big Ten and do just fine, especially from the Ivy League. Ryan Langborg, Danny Wolf. You've had other players from lower leagues who have done great step up in competition, and we haven't really seen it. So, um, guessing the starting lineup is certainly tough here. But Indiana's just hoping for enough of these mid-major guys to take a jump, and I think they'll be a pretty solid team.
Sean, do you want to head to Maryland now?
Yep. And Heron Zerno is down here. He decommitted months ago, and he just committed to Rutgers today, so he's got to update that. All right, we've got Maryland here. Buzz Williams, 58th in offense, 21st in defense. And he is still putting together some of the pieces, but starting to get a little bit of the core. Miles Rice from Indiana. He brings Pharrell Payne and Solomon Washington with him from A&M. Uh, David Coit from Kansas. He was a 20 plus point per game scorer at Northern Illinois. Didn't quite pan out at Kansas. So another one of those players. He gets Isaiah Watts, I think from Washington State. Let's see here. Um, he might have been a Texas A&M guy too. No, Washington State. All right, I was right. And then I think we're still a couple pieces away from Maryland being a finished product, Joe. But Buzz Williams has a floor. He'll get enough wins, even if he has like way less talent than other teams. And then when we saw this year, when he does actually have some talent, they're a pretty good team. So what are you looking forward to for Buzz year one in College Park?
One thing I don't know, it certainly didn't catch up with A&M this year. It's the height, but they rebound like crazy. So is that even much of a debate? I don't know whether we're gonna have one. Is there enough playmaking on this team? Is there enough shooting? That's my main question with, you know, that was A&M's problem this year. As good as they were, they shot putrid. They were just lucky. They were tougher than not lucky. They were just tougher than a lot of these teams. And in certain games, like versus Auburn, I don't think most people would disagree that Auburn was a far better team than A&M. It worked. I don't think it's going to work most of the year when they're playing more talented teams. This screams a team that's going to win a lot of home games, win road games versus some teams they're better than on the road, but not really pull off way too many upsets. So that has the makings of the 18 and 13 kind of bubble-ish team. And I know I'm categorizing a lot of Big Ten teams in this, but that's what it was this year, Sean. If you look down, whether it was an Ohio State, whether it was an Indiana, um, even in Oregon, I know they comfortably got in at a 5 seed. A lot of those teams had that kind of record.
Yep. I I don't think they're quite there yet. I think the play Miles Rice, it is all on his shoulders right now. Him and Watts. And
And Payne, maybe, yeah.
yeah, but I for me this feels a lot like 23-24 Indiana with a bunch of solid players like Khalil Ware and Renew and Mbako. Don't really sure if the pieces fit together. You don't have great shooting. Everybody's kind of a threat from out there and can make a three, but nobody's knocked down, so they'll sit inside, and I think they'll win a couple games when the other team doesn't make some shots. You get some home crowd plus 20 rebound margin games, but I would have to say at this point I don't think they're going to make the tournament. You just need a little bit extra in the Big 10 to make the tournament because you have got to be a good team to go 10 and 10. And this to me, Joe, seems like a team that's like 9 and 11, 8 and 12 of the Big Ten, but their metrics are way worse than that, and they're comfortably out of the tournament.
Yep. And to be honest with you, Sean, I'm not in love with I'm not in love with the lack of height, and I'm also not in love with versus Indiana and Ohio State. If I had to like simulate this team versus those two, I think the Ohio State Indiana from 24-25 beats this current team right now. If both teams were in their March form, let's call it.
Yeah, I think there is a part of Buzz Williams ball maybe being better suited for the Big Ten than the SEC, especially with the way that the game is officiated in the conference. I think that them seeing less whistles will certainly benefit them, and there'll be some games at home where the other team will be looking up and be like, "How on earth did we only have 7 free throws or something?" Like they're gonna have to play into it. It's part of the game. I think they'll win a couple games like that where they just bludgeon the other team to death, and it's a game where the whistles aren't as they let stuff go, and it's going to be a team that I think is sort of capable of anything in a bad way. Like they could lose to Penn State at home, or they could beat UCLA or Michigan. So interested to see. I don't think Maryland's done yet. They do have a couple more scholarships to fill. How they do that might figure out whether they can get to, an 8 or 9 seed in the tournament or whether they're going to the crown. All right, Nebraska up next, Joe. They've actually finished their scholarships. They've filled all 15. Fred Hoiberg and his team, a really awful end of the season. They end up going to the crown and winning it, um, which is good for them. They did not make the Big Ten tournament, but they get a season back. They get Price Sanford from Iowa.
Iowa.
Rink Mast is back from his redshirt season. They get Burke back, Sam Hoiberg back. They get Jamarquez Lawrence back on the transfer. He spent a year with Archie Miller at Rhode Island. You get Kendall Blue, who is definitely a transfer from somewhere that I'm forgetting. It's loading here from St. Thomas. He can shoot it 42%. They're losing two of the better players in their program history, and Juwan Gary and Bryce Williams,
Bryce Williams. Yep.
and not well, he certainly got a lot of players who could potentially sort of Moneyball replace him in the aggregate, Joe.
Yeah. Um, One thing I'll say about this team is I think it could be a lot like this year's team. A lot of scoring and a lot of good shooting will allow a Pinnacle Bank Arena crowd to take down to take. I think this is a team that will pull a lot of upsets and then lose a lot of stupid games, kind of like it did this year.
But they didn't really have that Pinnacle Bank feel to it this year where they
No,
won
not
it.
at
They
all.
they lost a couple of home games and then they ended up winning a couple road games that they never used to.
Yeah, and that in a way kind of screams Northwestern for the last few years, where they
Yeah.
were awful at home and somehow would win at Assembly Hall, like out of nowhere and whatnot. So I think Nebraska could kind of scream that this year, just with the fluctuation and shooting and whatnot. Um, Obviously they're not going to be as heavily reliant on Williams and Gary as they're gone, but perhaps more ball movement on this team could be a benefit. But at the same time, Sean, I think it's going to go a lot of the way. Price shoots, Asijan shoots, and Mast controls the ball.
And in Fred Hoiberg ball, it's probably the closest now without McCaffrey in terms of like NBA ISO ball offense. Like it's a lot of junk ball. It's a lot of if you can cover them one on one, you're probably okay. There are teams who are bad at that and would lose by a lot, including my Indiana Hoosiers, but I don't even know if they're good enough for that, Joe. You got to have good players who can beat people one on one. And, I actually could see this going pretty bad for Nebraska. I understand why Fred Hoiberg is trying to build a more well-rounded team, less reliant on some of the bigger players, but yeah, those big players won you a lot of games that could have gone either way.
Yeah.
But all right, let's keep it moving here. Got Washington at 48th, a lot of movement for them. They bring in Wesley Yates from USC, big price tag there. He was originally there under the last coach. He comes over. Oh no, he was committed there. He's from there. Um, Freshman year at USC was a really good player. Was thought to have been going to the NBA draft. Probably would have been in the first round, but he comes back 43% from three, a lot of points. He's going to be the guy here. They needed a guy to replace Great Osibor. They get Zoom Diallo back, a couple of transfers in, like Lathan Somerville from Rutgers and Bryson Tucker from Indiana. And You have to think at least, Joe, that Washington will take a step in the right direction this year.
Absolutely. I think Danny Sprinkle, a lot of people overlooked him because of the success that Dusty May had, or even nationally, if Pat Kelsey, John Calipari had, especially late in the year. But this is a guy who people were very high on going into last season. Certainly, people weren't high on Washington's roster, but I do think they've stepped it up. I think between Yates, Tucker, Somerville, those are three guys very familiar with the conference now. Zoom Diallo as well. I think there are some good pieces here. I think making the tournament might be a stretch, but I think certainly being a team that plays meaningful games in February and March is not too much to ask for with this roster.
And he almost got an incomplete for last year. Like they really had no business winning games in the Big Ten. That roster was really great Asabor and a mid-major quality roster around them. He gets a couple of big Yates, this Agnesevich guy. I'm on his page right now from Lipscomb. He was highly sought after. He's making a ton of threes. 42%, 41% on 120 attempts. That's a lot. And he's a wing. Maybe he can play the four for them if with Yates being in there too. I mean, I think are they sort of a year behind on the Penn State path, or are they can they take a little bit of a bigger step than that? That's the question for me. It is probably a big jump to make the tournament, but you get a couple of good teams on your home floor, long travel. Maybe you can beat enough teams to make it, give yourself a chance. But they got to at least be a little better than last year, and I think they should be.
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. And I think without further ado, should we go to their Pacific Northwest neighbor?
And that is the Oregon Ducks. I'm a little bit surprised to see them this low
Yeah,
here,
that
Joe.
was my
Dana
first comment.
Dina Altman. Nobody has won more games in March than him in Oregon since 2015, whatever that stat was. It was a pretty impressive one. They get Jackson Shellstad back, and they also get Nate Biddle back, and he's not on here. He's got to come back from the NBA draft. But maybe let's see if Nate Biddle makes this a little better. Joey, you get Kwame Evans Jr. back too. A couple of transfers. Simpkins is a transfer. I know that. Um, but I don't see that big of a drop off happening for Oregon.
No, I think this is another team that could hypothetically contend for the Big Ten title, but it's more likely they're going to be playing for a protected seed in March, which they were pretty close to toward the beginning of the year. I know they had that little falter from late January into early February that kind of cost them that. So Oregon's a really talented team, Sean. Dana Altman, I think, doesn't get enough credit because of the stacked coaches in this league between, a Tom Izzo, a Matt Painter. I think those guys get most of the recognition. Not that it's not deserved, but I think Dana Altman should also be up there because of the track record he's had over the past decade and really his whole career. Uh, if Kwame Evans Jr. makes a huge jump, and we saw flashes of it last year with Biddle and Shellstad back, that's another big three that's really hard to discredit. Sean, I, I did rank Ohio State's big three as the best offensive big three, like in terms of scoring and you know scoring and offense. This is one all around that's pretty damn good too, Sean. It's up there with Purdue's certainly, and probably and definitely up there with Ohio State's offensively. I just don't think it's as good, but still, having those three guys as the core of your team, there are a lot worse options than that.
And as the people can see here, Joe, Biddle being in there brings them all the way up to 30th. So
Mhm.
clearly a big jump on offense and actually zero point 0.3 points per possession worse defensively with Nate Biddle on the floor. That doesn't make much sense being that he is, you know, a good rim protector. But 25 spots. I don't know if there's a waiver situation here with Biddle, but everything coming out of Oregon is that he'll be there next year. And like, we talk about starting lineups, big threes. These top two are as good as it gets. I think other than USC's duo and Purdue's duo. Um, Now other teams don't really have duos; they just have better starting fives, maybe. But um, Simpkins is a guy who's interesting. He's a senior. He is from Elon over here on the East Coast. Indiana's played them a couple times. I've seen him play, and then watching Nick Dorn film too. he is somebody who I think will translate to the Big Ten a little bit. He's sort of a bigger guard. Um, I think he's 6'4", 6'5", high assist rate, uh, decent turnover rate against good teams. Not the knockdown shooter that they're probably looking for, but maybe he can take the ball out of Jackson Shellstad's hands a little bit when necessary, and I think he'll probably start. Um, but again, I think a lot of these teams, Joe, have the top three, four, five players figured out, and players 5 through 8, 9 is what's sort of going to determine whether they're a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament or needing to win the 8-9 game in the Big Ten tournament to make it.
Yeah.
But all right, let's keep it moving. A couple more left. Since we added Biddle, we got to go back twice here. All right, Northwestern. We've got Chris Collins back again. Looked like that there was a time where he wasn't going to be the Northwestern coach this year, but he is. Nick Martinelli's coming back. KJ Wyndham, Justin Mullins. Brooks Barnheiser is trying to get his waiver. I don't think that's likely at this point. Um, we can pretend like he is and see where it's going to put him, but they have added a few players in the portal, Joe, but it's hard to see them improving over last year's team with Leach and Barnheiser likely gone.
Yeah, I think it's going to be the Nick Martinelli show and how far he could take them. I don't doubt his capabilities. It's just that's not a solid way to win in this conference. I think Chris Collins knows that. Is there going to be someone else on this team unexpected
There
to
has to
kind of
be.
to kind of assist with Martinelli? I think there's no other option, Sean. So um, Chris Collins certainly not in the hot seat. Shouldn't ever be, to be honest with you, unless it's like a 5 bad seasons in a row, like Bobby Bowden situation at Florida State at the end. So, you know, I think this is a team that's probably going to be played out of the gutter, to be honest with you, Sean. They're going to be playing to make the Big Ten tournament and perhaps at best playing to not have their first game be on the Wednesday of championship weekend.
And Barnheiser brings them up to 41st again. I don't if he ends up coming back, treat that as a surprise. But I don't think the way that Northwestern is operating here, with some of their targets being guards in the portal, it doesn't seem like he's going to be coming back. Justin Mullins is back too. We're on his page, and then the one right before him is a transfer. Let's look at his page too before we move on. But um, yeah, Jordan Clayton, I think he's a transfer. Oh no, he's not. They did bring somebody in. Um, who should be able to start. But yeah, it's hard to see them building on last year, and um, we'll have to see. Really, we haven't seen Chris Collins in any other. Even when they were good, they were still sort of scrapping and trying to stay in it with the good teams, and then they'd end up picking a couple of them off, and it would be big. But they bring this guy Arrington Page from Cincinnati and USC. Not a lot of minutes there, but a high rebound rate, and they expect some good things from him. But the players' names on the back of the jerseys might be different, Joe, but I think we're getting a similar version of the Wildcats.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep it moving. Gonna have to wait for this to load. Only got a couple left. All right, here we
Well,
go.
while it is loading those shot, it
Yep.
will be Penn State. And
Penn State up next, 110 and 56. This will be year 3 for Mike Rhodes. Year 2 looked like it was going to be great early on. They pick up a big win. They look like they're going to the tournament, and then they go on a really bad run of games. I think it was 10 of 11 losses or 11 of 12, something like that. And they're coming to this year losing Ace Baldwin Jr., who has been the pride and soul of Mike Rhodes' teams for 5 years, going back to VCU. They get Dillion back, they get Niederhauser back. But other than that, Joe, I think we are looking at the team that's going to finish last in the Big Ten.
yeah, Sean, this is another team that's fighting out of the gutter. And unlike Northwestern, I lost you for a sec. No, I'm back. Yeah, I could see how this team stepping up. And unlike Chris Collins, I Mike Rhodes doesn't have the acumen in the Big Ten quite yet for me to give him the benefit of the doubt. So I don't think there's much more for me to comment on Penn State unless there's a severe surprise. I will say if Mike Rhodes with this current roster that we're looking at, barring like some crazy star or European or high school kid that turns into a phenom, um, with this roster, if he gets into the top 12, I think in my book, that's a really, really impressive coaching performance. I just don't really, I was pretty much saying I don't see it with the amount of talent on this team versus in this conference.
Yeah, I think it's a tough position. NIL wise, there's so many against the current in this league, and still a football school. I think it'll be tough. I think it will be tough for them. They don't have the best home crowd, so I don't know if they can steal any games at home. But up next, Joe, is our Rutgers Scarlet Knights, year one with the lottery picks, and the final year with the lottery picks. Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey went about as poorly as you could expect for the team. Now, those players will be ranked very highly in the NBA draft, but Peichel sort of lost his defensive identity this year. And while he got pretty much absolutely everything out of his previous teams, there was certainly a lot left to be desired with this year's team. And Joe, there's a lot of new players in here. They did bring in Heron Zerno today. So you can add a professional European shooter, probably going to play a lot of minutes for them. But Dylan Grant, Jamichael Davis, Emmanuel Ogbole, stark contrast in the level of talent in Piscataway from last year to this one.
Yeah, I think probably this year, Sean, Steve Peichel just needs to get his identity back, play good defense, make the rack. The environment it was, uh, the challenging environment it was record wise for the teams that visit there, because I do not see this team coming close to making the tournament. So, can he get this program to believe again and then have something cookie in 26, 27? I think that's probably Rutgers' goal. I think this is a huge bridge year for Steve Peichel. It's been 2 years in a row his teams kind of underperformed. I think 22, 23, they barely missed the tournament, probably should have been in, to be completely honest with you. And then, you know, 23, 24, not so great. 24, 25, disaster. I think this year he's got to win. Not that he should have to win the fans' trust back, but I think that's the situation, which I personally think is ridiculous because he's done a phenomenal job there. But that's the current landscape we live in. So I'm not going to have to. That's a greater question for college basketball lore, more so than this podcast.
It just seemed like for years, Rutgers was had less talent and they were winning way more games than they should have. They finally get the NBA level players that they've been searching for years, and it goes worse than all of the seasons. Maybe his first couple were worse, but it's disappointing to see that because there was a way that had they gotten better role players, they could have been a Sweet 16 team and been really fun. And unfortunately, they weren't very good at defense, and they were not as good at offense as it appeared. They did bring in a couple of transfers. I cycled through their pages there. Um, Not a lot of minutes at the high major level from these transfers. Tariq Francis from NJIT, almost 80% of the minutes. He's a scorer. Um, really good usage rate, 33.8%. That's a lot. It's hard to get that high. Super high assist rate to turnover rate, too. Maybe he's the creator. Jamichael Davis is back. They do have some height. Maybe they just become a really good defensive team. But, I would have to say with the history of the rack, I think there's a little bit of a higher ceiling than the likes of Penn State and the last couple that we've gone through. But certainly with the floors is very low for Rutgers. All right. Last but not least is Nico Medved in Minnesota. Year one for the Minnesota grad. And there's a lot of unknowns on this roster, Joe. You could go down the list. Don't think I know any of these guys. Bobby Durkin from Davidson, a lot of minutes, pretty good scorer there. You've got Isaac Asuma from Minnesota, didn't really play much last year off the bench. Was we're looking at Langston Reynolds. He was in the Atlantic 10, I think. Oh no, Northern Colorado. Like you're searching for things here with Minnesota.
Yeah, I think the nicest way I could put this, I mean this seriously, because Nico Medved's a hell of a coach. Nico Medved, get ready to learn Danny Sprinkle and
Yep.
Mike Rhodes experience year one. I don't I will drop this. There was a rumor that Will Cheddar was getting highly coveted by Minnesota. That does not shock me. I think this was a team that it's really hard to get guys to want to play there. I think getting guys to play for
It shouldn't be
Medved's,
though.
no, it shouldn't be, but getting guys to play for Medved isn't hard. Getting guys to play at Minnesota is pretty damn hard shot. I think that's the bottom line.
And Will Shetter is a fine player and he's a good player at Michigan, but I mean, doesn't that tell you a lot about their roster if they're trying
Yeah,
to
that's the
tamper with Will
problem.
Shetter? I
Yeah.
mean, he's not a player that you would tamper with.
If
I mean,
Indiana did that, I think Sean would be breaking his screen right
yeah, I
now.
mean they're like Will Shetter's a fine player. I don't mean this as a as an offense to him, but if your team is trying to get him like to clearly be one of the guys on this team, I think it is Danny Sprinkle from last year, Joe. There's no expectations. Uh, just like don't have like a historically bad season. Like
Yeah.
get 10 wins, line up teams 300 to 360 in the non-conference, get some W's on your calendar, uh, and then maybe try and get 5 Big 10 wins because I
Yeah.
think it is going to be tough. You don't quite have the travel. Minnesota used to be the long travel day back in the day before we got really the East Coast teams and the West Coast teams. But um, it's a new era in Minnesota. We were a little bit surprised to see it happen after their sort of resurgence at the end of the year, but it's going to be a tough one for Minnesota. All right, a little longer episode today, but we went through all the teams, and please be sure to check out what else we have in store the rest of the off season. So, thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.